Marks of the Past. Chapter 1. The Warning. Jack Reacher stepped off the bus in the sleepy border town of Fort Dawson. The place seemed inconspicuous, just another spot on the map. But there was something in the air, a strange quiet that prickled Reacher's instincts. As he adjusted the collar of his jacket, the thick heat pressed down, carrying with it the lingering scent of dust and oil. A narrow-eyed stare from an old-timer leaning against a rusty truck greeted him as he passed, a silent warning wrapped in curiosity. Reacher had come because of a message, one that had traveled through an old military buddy, Danny Tate. Tate had been a comrade from his army days, a man Reacher could trust. The message had been simple, almost too simple. Just 2 words: need help. That was enough to bring Reacher here, where trouble clung to the streets like a thick, unseen fog. A figure approached from the shadows near the bus station, his silhouette barely visible against the flickering streetlight. Reacher recognized him immediately. Danny Tate, though he looked rougher around the edges, worn and a little defeated. His once strong build had thinned, his face shadowed by worry and exhaustion. "Thanks for coming," Tate murmured, glancing around as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. "What's going on, Danny?" Reacher asked, keeping his voice low. Tate's gaze darted around, lingering on the alleys and the street corners. "Cartel," he whispered. "They're after me. After something I know. Something we did." Reacher's jaw tightened. He had left his military past behind, or so he thought. But hearing the fear in Tate's voice, the weight of those 2 simple words pulled him back into memories he'd long tried to bury. "What did we do, Danny?" Reacher asked, his voice steely, feeling the stirrings of an old battle call. Tate swallowed, his eyes dark. "It's something I didn't know back then, but now they'll kill to keep it buried." Reacher glanced around, his instincts razor-sharp. He knew one thing: whatever shadows from his past were threatening Tate, he'd have to face them head-on. Want to see where Reacher's past will take him? Subscribe and share to follow his next moves. Chapter 2. The Cartel's Reach. Reacher and Tate didn't linger near the bus station. They moved quickly through Fort Dawson's dimly lit streets, weaving between buildings to avoid being seen. The tension in the air was almost visible. Tate's paranoia was real, and Reacher could feel the weight of his friend's unease pressing down on them like a lead blanket. They ducked into an abandoned garage on the outskirts of town. Inside, the stale smell of gasoline mixed with rust and oil. Reacher scanned the place, then turned to Tate, who leaned against the wall, struggling to catch his breath. "Start talking, Tate," Reacher said, his voice low but firm. "What are we dealing with here?" Tate looked down, fiddling with a rusted metal wrench he'd picked up. "After we left the service, I got into some private work. Freelance security, a few contracts south of the border." He paused, glancing up at Reacher. "One of them was with a man who turned out to be part of a cartel. Real nasty piece of work. He wanted information." "What kind of information?" Tate hesitated, his fingers tight around the wrench. "Government intel, military secrets. He said it would help secure his interests." I didn't bite. Figured he was just testing me, you know. But a few months later, I found out they'd put me on a watch list, marked me as a liability. Reacher narrowed his eyes, pieces falling into place. "And now they're here to clean up the loose ends?" Tate nodded, his face pale. "They think I know things I don't, and they won't stop until they're sure I can't talk." A sudden creak echoed through the silence, followed by footsteps outside. Reacher's hand instinctively went to his pocket, where he kept a small folding knife, his only weapon at the moment. He nodded to Tate, gesturing for him to stay quiet as the footsteps grew louder. 2 figures appeared at the entrance of the garage, their faces shadowed in the dim light. They spoke in low voices, one of them chuckling softly, as if the hunt was all just a game. "Mr. Tate," One of the men called, his voice dripping with mockery. "We know you're in there. Might as well come out and make it easy on yourself. You've got nowhere to run." Reacher's mind raced. He knew that if Tate was found, it wouldn't end with an arrest. It would end with silence. Cold, unforgiving silence. Without another word, Reacher grabbed a metal pipe lying nearby and crouched low, signaling for Tate to stay put. The men entered, flashlights slicing through the dark. They were closing in, clearly expecting an easy capture. Just as the first man passed him, Reacher sprang up, swinging the pipe with controlled force, striking the man's hand and sending his gun clattering to the floor. The second man reacted too late, his flashlight swinging wildly as Reacher landed a punch that knocked him off balance. In the scuffle that followed, Reacher and Tate managed to subdue both men, but Reacher knew it wouldn't end there. "They know we're here," Reacher said, catching his breath, "and they'll send more." Tate swallowed, nodding as he glanced at the unconscious men on the floor. "They won't stop, Jack. They're coming for both of us now." Reacher looked at his old friend, feeling the weight of a past he hadn't considered in years, pressing down on him. "Then we'll take the fight to them. Whatever they're hiding, we'll find it first." Curious about what Reacher and Tate will uncover? Subscribe and share to stay with them through the storm. Chapter 3. Old Wounds. They left the garage, moving through Fort Dawson's back streets, keeping to the shadows. Reacher was alert, his instincts sharp, scanning every alley and intersection. Tate followed closely behind, his shoulders tense, glancing back now and then, as if expecting another ambush. A few blocks away, they reached the edge of town, where an old run-down motel stood. The neon sign flickered, casting a dull glow over the cracked pavement. Reacher checked them in under a false name, paying in cash and requesting a room at the far end of the building. Once inside, Tate sat on the edge of the bed, his hands shaking slightly. He glanced at Reacher, his face taut, eyes shadowed. "You have no idea what you're getting into here, Reacher." Reacher leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You want to tell me why this cartel is so interested in you? Because I'm betting it's more than a few bad contracts." Tate hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. After a moment, he spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "Years ago, we took part in an off-the-books operation. It was supposed to be a quick in and out, gather intel, report back. But what we found, I think it's why they're coming after me now." Reacher felt a cold weight settle in his gut. "What did we find, Tate?" Tate's hands twisted together. "I can't be sure, but I overheard enough. They had informants inside government agencies, people feeding them intel on border operations and drug routes. When they figured out we were onto them, they ordered a hit on our team." Reacher remembered it now, vividly. The mission had gone south fast. Their team barely made it out, and the few who survived scattered, each trying to disappear from the cartel's radar. It made sense now. Tate must have been the one who saw the cartel's network and knew enough to put a target on his back. "So, you're saying they think you're still a threat?" Reacher asked, his eyes narrowing. Tate nodded. "Not just me, Reacher. You were there too. I think they're tying up every loose end from that mission. Every single one of us who saw or heard anything." Reacher leaned forward, his mind working through the implications. If the cartel knew he was here, they wouldn't stop until both men were silenced. This was no ordinary grudge. It was a hunt, a calculated and systematic one. Suddenly a soft, scraping noise came from outside the motel room door. Reacher held up a hand and Tate froze. Footsteps approached, slow and cautious, then stopped just outside. Reacher crept toward the door, pressing his ear against it, his heart steady, his mind focused. Without warning, the door burst open, nearly knocking Reacher off his feet. Two men in dark clothing stormed in, one wielding a pistol, the other carrying a baton. Reacher moved on instinct, grabbing the pistol-wielding man's arm and twisting it sharply until he dropped the weapon with a grunt of pain. Tate threw himself at the second attacker, the two of them crashing into the bedside table. In the chaos, Reacher managed to overpower the first man, disarming him and delivering a final blow that left him unconscious. Tate held his own, wrestling the other man to the ground until the fight left him lying still. Silence filled the room as Reacher and Tate caught their breath, standing over the two men. The reality of their situation was sinking in fast. There would be no safe haven, no place they could hide without the cartel finding them. "Looks like they knew where to find us," Tate muttered, glancing at the door. Reacher nodded. "And they'll keep finding us until we do something about it." "What do you suggest?" Reacher's gaze was steely, his voice unshakable. "We take the fight to them. Whatever information they want buried, we dig it up first. Expose them." Tate looked at Reacher, understanding the risk they were about to take. "That means we're going after the cartel, doesn't it?" Reacher's jaw tightened. "Only way to end this. Want to see how Reacher and Tate will handle the cartel's relentless pursuit? Like, subscribe and share to keep up with every twist." Chapter 4. The Chase. Reacher and Tate wasted no time. Within an hour, they had ditched the motel and secured an old pickup truck that Tate claimed would be untraceable. As they drove into the desert night, Reacher mapped out their next move. Their only lead was a name, Carlos Ortega, a high-ranking lieutenant in the cartel and a man with a reputation for brutality. Ortega was the key. If they could find him, they could get answers. The road stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, shadows playing tricks along the desert floor. Tate's knuckles were white as he gripped the wheel, his eyes flickering nervously to the rearview mirror. "Relax," Reacher said, his voice steady. "Ortega won't be expecting us to come to him. He thinks he's got us cornered." Tate glanced over, a hint of a smile breaking his tense expression. "Still as confident as ever, aren't you?" "Just realistic," Reacher replied, scanning the empty road ahead. "People like Ortega don't expect trouble, not until it's too late." As dawn broke, they approached a small town close to the border, a place that had long been a known waypoint for cartel traffic. The streets were quiet, and the few locals they passed avoided eye contact, hurrying along as if they could sense the danger in the air. They parked in an alley, and Reacher led the way toward a dilapidated warehouse on the edge of town, a known cartel hangout that Ortega frequented. Inside, the stale smell of old wood and dust filled the space. Reacher took in every corner, mentally mapping out the room as they waited, hidden among the shadows. They didn't have to wait long. Footsteps echoed in the warehouse, and Ortega entered, flanked by two bodyguards, each armed and alert. Ortega himself looked every bit the cartel boss, imposing, with a scar running down his cheek and eyes as cold as steel. He barked orders in Spanish, and his men moved, checking the building's perimeter. Reacher signaled to Tate. They couldn't afford a firefight, not here. The element of surprise was their best weapon. Just as one of the guards passed by their hiding spot, Reacher lunged, catching him in a chokehold and silencing him before he could call for help. Tate moved quickly, disarming the second guard with a quick twist of the wrist and sending him crumpling to the floor. Ortega spun around, reaching for a pistol, but Reacher was faster, stepping into the light. "Carlos Ortega," Reacher said, his voice calm but edged with steel. Ortega's face twisted in shock, then hardened into a sneer. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do," Reacher replied, his gaze steady. "I'm here because you and your cartel made the mistake of trying to cover your tracks." Ortega laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the warehouse. "You think you can threaten me? I have an army. What do you have?" Reacher's response was a cold smile. "Enough to bring you down." With a quick motion, he knocked Ortega's pistol out of his hand, pushing him against a stack of crates. Ortega's bravado faded as he realized he was at Reacher's mercy. Tate stepped forward, his face filled with anger. "You tried to kill us, tried to bury everything we know about your operation." Ortega sneered, spitting at their feet. "You're already dead men walking. The cartel owns this town, this border. You think a couple of washed-up soldiers can stop us?" Reacher's grip tightened on Ortega's collar, his eyes unyielding. "I think you've underestimated us." With Ortega restrained, Reacher searched him, finding a folded sheet of paper tucked in his jacket pocket. He opened it and saw a series of addresses, names, and a small symbol, a twisted scorpion. Tate leaned in, recognition flashing in his eyes. "That's the symbol from the mission, the one they told us to ignore," Tate said, his voice low. Reacher's mind raced. The symbol was a direct link to the cartel's network, something they'd only seen once, long ago, on classified documents. If Ortega was still using it, it meant that whatever they had stumbled upon back then was still in operation, and it had become even deadlier. "You're going to tell us everything," Reacher said, his voice steady and unbreakable. Ortega's eyes darted between them, a flash of fear breaking through his cold exterior. "You're making a mistake." Reacher leaned closer. "No, the mistake was yours." Chapter 5. Buried Secrets. Ortega hesitated, his eyes flitting between Reacher and Tate. But with Reacher's iron gaze fixed on him, he finally relented. "You want answers? Black Creek. That's where they keep the files, the names, the photographs, everything. It's all buried out there, in the old warehouse." Black Creek was nothing more than a name Reacher half remembered from years before. It was a barren stretch of land near the border, far from any town, isolated enough that it was easy to forget. But Tate's expression said he remembered it well, perhaps too well. They left Ortega tied and helpless in the warehouse and headed toward Black Creek as the sun began to set. Shadows deepened along the desert road, casting long, eerie shapes across the rocky landscape. By the time they reached the location, night had settled in, silent and still. Reacher parked the truck near the rusted remains of an old gate, barely visible in the dim glow of the headlights. "This is it," Tate said, glancing around, his face etched with memories. They called it a storage facility, but it was a graveyard for secrets. The building was a crumbling structure with broken windows and a roof that had collapsed in several places. As they stepped inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and decay. Filing cabinets and steel drawers lined the walls, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the dark. Reacher went to the nearest cabinet, prying it open. Inside, stacks of documents were neatly filed, each stamped with a twisted scorpion symbol. He flipped through the papers, piecing together a story that sent a chill down his spine. Government alliances, cartel dealings, names of officials on both sides, all neatly categorized, hidden in the depths of this forgotten place. They had stumbled upon a network of betrayal that spanned years. "Look at this," Reacher said, pulling out a photograph. It showed a young Tate alongside cartel members and military officials he vaguely recognized. "This is why they came after us. We were pawns in a game they were playing all along." Tate's face tightened as he examined the photograph, his eyes dark with anger. "They made us think we were on the right side, Reacher, but we were just the expendable ones, the ones who'd take the fall if it all went wrong." Before Reacher could respond, he heard the faint crunch of gravel outside, a sound too steady to be the wind. He tensed, his instincts sharp. A moment later, headlights flooded the front windows as two black SUVs pulled up. Doors slammed, and several men stepped out, armed and ready, moving in formation toward the entrance. "They knew we'd come," Reacher murmured, motioning for Tate to take cover behind a row of crates. He crouched low, watching the shadows of the men as they crept closer. The first man stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the room. Without hesitating, Reacher struck, knocking the gun from his hand and sending him to the ground with a swift, silent blow. but the others heard the scuffle and moved in, guns raised. Shots echoed in the darkness, bullets ricocheting off metal and wood. Reacher and Tate fought back, ducking behind crates, moving in sync, a skill honed from years of training together. The attackers were skilled, but Reacher was relentless, calculated, taking them down one by one until only silence remained. When the dust settled, Reacher and Tate were the only ones left standing. Breathing heavily, they regrouped near the pile of scattered documents. Tate looked around at the bodies, then at Reacher, a mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction on his face. "What now?" Tate asked, glancing down at the files that lay at their feet. Reacher knelt, grabbing a few papers and stuffing them into his jacket. "Now we expose it all. Every name, every deal, every lie they sold to keep their secrets hidden." Tate nodded, his eyes fierce, understanding the stakes. "It won't be easy. They'll come after us again." Reacher looked at him, his expression unreadable. "Then they'll regret not finishing the job." With the evidence in hand, Reacher and Tate walked out into the night, leaving behind the past they could no longer forget. As they drove away, Reacher felt a sense of finality settle over him. A weight lifted, even as the horizon promised new dangers. Whatever came next, he would be ready. The end.
If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.